My name is Elena Rayner. I'm 35 years old, a former U.S. Army Special Forces officer, medically retired after 14 years of service. And as of this morning, I was being quietly declared legally incompetent in front of a room full of strangers. Ms. Rayner, the judge, said gently, tilting his head as if he were speaking to a child who had wandered into the wrong room. Do you have any response to the petition I didn't answer? Instead, I reached down, unlatched the brass buckle of my case, and removed a thick sealed manila envelope stamped red across the flap. As I slid it across the table toward the bailiff, I could feel Marcus watching me. His face was smug, almost lazy. He thought he'd already won. The judge sighed, clearly annoyed by the delay, but opened the envelope anyway. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. By page 4, his expression had changed. No longer bored, no longer pitying, just quiet, focused alarm. And then right on cue, the heavy doors behind me creaked open. 12 soldiers in full Green Beret combat uniforms marched into the courtroom. They didn't look at anyone. They walked in perfect formation, stopped behind my chair, and saluted. The judge stood, and Marcus Rayner's world began to fall apart. The first time I saw the psychiatric report, I was sitting in the witness box. The leather beneath me creaked every time I shifted, but I didn't move much. Movement invited attention, and attention in that room felt like exposure. Across the courtroom, my brother Marcus adjusted his tie with 2 fingers, slow and deliberate, as if he were preparing to sell a company, not dismantle a human being. His voice was warm, measured. "Your Honor," he said, "my sister was a soldier. A damn good one once. But that was before." He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked through me like I was already gone. Delilah sat in the front row, perfectly poised. One hand curled around a silk handkerchief she hadn't used. She dabbed at her dry eyes when the judge glanced her way, like a woman trying hard not to break. She'd always known how to control a room without saying a word. Then the lawyer stood. A tall man from Raleigh, with steel hair and a voice designed for juries. "Your Honor," he began, "we submit into evidence Exhibit A." The clerk approached the bench with a file so thick it looked like a thesis, but I already knew what was in it. I'd seen the copy delivered to my apartment weeks before the first time I read my own name beside the words borderline personality disorder. I hadn't said a word then either. The judge flipped through pages with the impatience of a man who thought he already understood. It was all there. False diagnoses, invented episodes, video clips taken from a phone hidden in the trees during a remembrance ceremony in the woods. I hadn't been talking to myself. I'd been whispering the names of the dead. But in this courtroom, truth was a fragile thing. "She walks through the forest at night," Marcus said with quiet sorrow. Talking to shadows, talking to ghosts. The words hung heavy in the air. I stared at the floor. The wood grain was split near my left boot, a dark knot worn into the shape of a spiral. I stared at it until my vision blurred. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Rayner," he said gently, "this is a significant motion. If you'd like to speak on your behalf," I shook my head once. "Not yet." Marcus exhaled slowly like someone watching a sick pet being put down. For a moment I saw the boy I used to protect, the boy who cried over a broken wristwatch and crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. But then he spoke again and that boy vanished forever. "I love my sister," he said, "and that's why I have to do this." That was the moment I stopped feeling cold. I felt nothing at all. Just a click inside me like a switch flipped. The truth was coming. I just needed them to finish their play. And when they did, I'd raise the curtain on mine. The house I grew up in sat on a hill just outside of Breckenridge, North Carolina. White shutters, wraparound porch, a swing that always leaned slightly to the left. To the neighbors, it looked like something off a postcard, a symbol of American normalcy, old money, without ostentation. But to me, that house was a hierarchy. A quiet, curated stage where every line had already been written, and I'd never been cast for the lead. Marcus was the golden boy. Everyone said so. From the time he could tie his shoes, it was clear the world would bend to his ambition. Every soccer trophy, every school award, every half-earned accolade was celebrated like prophecy. I once heard my father call him the Rayner legacy during a backyard barbecue. I was standing 10 feet away, holding a tray of drinks. He didn't look in my direction. When I brought home straight A's, my mother nodded and said, "Well, good." But don't let it make you arrogant. When I scored the winning shot at a high school championship, my father only asked if I'd remembered to iron my jersey. I learned early that praise in our home came with strings, and those strings never reached me. The worst of it came the night Marcus got accepted into Princeton. My father stood up at Thanksgiving dinner and clinked his glass with the edge of a silver fork. "I have an announcement," he said, grinning. "Our boy made it. Full ride. Ivy League." Applause broke out around the table. My mother teared up. Even the cousins who barely knew him clapped like they'd been handed inheritance shares. Then my father pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and tossed Marcus the keys to a vintage '68 Mustang he'd been restoring in the garage. Marcus caught them with one hand, smirking like he'd expected it all along. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared, I approached Dad in the kitchen with trembling hands. In my palm was a gold medal from the State Science and Engineering Fair. I'd won first place for a prototype drone that detected soil deficiencies, something no high schooler in our county had done before. He looked at it, turned it over once, then set it on the counter. "That's nice, honey," he muttered, "but things like this won't help you find a husband." Then he nodded toward the sink full of dishes. "Be a good girl and help your mother." That was the moment I stopped hoping. When I enlisted a year later, no one tried to stop me. My mother cried, but not because she was afraid I'd get hurt. She cried because it would embarrass her at church. Marcus followed me to the hallway as I left, voice low. Smile gone. "You're not built for it, Lena," he whispered. "You'll wash out, come crawling home, and I won't be there when you do." I nodded. Not because I believed him, but because I wanted him to remember that moment. Because someday I planned to make him eat those words one by one. There's a kind of silence in survival training that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's not peace, it's pressure. The kind that settles in your bones and makes you question whether the next step will be your last or your first towards something better. I learned that in the Badlands of Fort Sabine 2 months into Special Forces assessment. I was one of 5 women in a group of 67 candidates. We were ghosts in a system that still didn't know where to place us, noticed only when we failed. My ruck weighed 83 pounds. The swamp weighed more. Every inch of my body hurt. Every muscle screamed. But I kept walking. There was a moment night exercise rain coming sideways, team completely lost in a maze of unmarked terrain. One guy from California, thick-necked and cocky, turned to me and said, "You should go home, Rainer. This ain't your kind of war." I said nothing, just tightened my grip on the compass and led them out of the dark an hour later, using a ridgeline, the sound of distant rail cars, and the faintest dip in air pressure. No one said thank you, but that night by the fire, he handed me the last protein bar from his pack, without a word. I took it. That was the apology. Later, when we were deployed, he never called me ma'am, just Rainer. That was enough. By the time I reached my 5th year, I had been promoted twice and posted to forward operations in Syria. That's where I met Corporal Leo Morales, a kid from El Paso, with a laugh louder than his rifle. We ran night recon together, patrolled villages that barely existed on maps. He called me Cap even after my promotion. One day he handed me a smooth piece of stone. "Kinda looks like Texas." He grinned. "I still have it." Leo died on a Tuesday. We were ambushed on the edge of a no-contact zone. The med bag was late rerouted, we were told. No gauze, no coagulant, just pressure and hope. He bled out in my arms, whispering his mother's name until the light left his eyes. The shipment that could have saved him. It never made it. Logistics error, they said. But something in me never believed that. A signature mismatch. A line item that didn't make sense. I filed a report, but war swallows paperwork faster than it does people. After that, I kept going. I trained others. I built field protocols. I swallowed my grief like dry sand. Until an IED ended my field career and sent me home with a medal, a limp, and a diagnosis. Back in the States, I didn't go to the family house. I rented a quiet apartment in Hawthorne Valley, close enough to disappear. I didn't plan to reconnect, not with Marcus, not with Delilah. But the letter came anyway, a formal invitation to a charity tea in Chapel Glen. Handwritten. Delilah's script. Elegant, controlled. "We'd love to see you, Elena. It's time to come home." The tea room smelled like lavender and lemon zest. Soft music played overhead, Vivaldi, I think. And the women around me sparkled in pastels and pearls. I stood near the back, holding a porcelain cup that felt too delicate for my fingers. Delilah spotted me first. Her face lit up like she'd just seen a wounded bird return to the nest. "Elena," she said, crossing the floor in 3 fluid steps. Her dress whispered against her heels like stage curtains parting. "I'm so glad you came." She kissed my cheek cool and rehearsed, then turned me to face her circle of acquaintances. "Everyone," she said brightly, "this is my sister-in-law, a real American hero. She's just back from her service overseas. Let's all be gentle with her. She's had a hard time adjusting." The words landed like glass shards in a velvet glove. I smiled politely the way soldiers smile when people mean well, but understand nothing. Afterward, she guided me to a corner table near the window. The view was beautiful rolling golf greens, manicured hedges, but it felt like a trap. She sat across from me, hands folded. "You look tired," she said, voice soft. "How have you been sleeping?" I shrugged. "Fine." She tilted her head. "Nightmares?" I didn't answer. She pressed a hand over mine. "I know it's hard. Marcus and I, well, we just want what's best for you. There's someone we think you should meet." That's how I ended up across from a man in a beige sweater and wire-rimmed glasses 2 days later at a coffee shop called The Bramble. He introduced himself as Dr. Kenneth Boyd, a trauma specialist Delilah had highly recommended. He didn't take notes, didn't wear a white coat, just sat with his hands wrapped around a paper cup and asked questions so gently I didn't notice how deep they cut. He asked about Leo, about the ambush, about the IED that ended my career and shattered the last sliver of bone in my right leg. He asked how it felt to come home and feel invisible, how it felt to remember things others didn't believe had happened. And I told him, not all of it, but enough. About the stone from Leo, the night patrols, the sound of bones breaking under pressure, about whispering names into pine forests so they wouldn't disappear. He nodded like he understood, like it mattered. I never saw the recording device he had beside his phone. Didn't notice the red blinking light tucked under a napkin dispenser. 3 weeks later, I received the summons. Petition for emergency conservatorship, Elena Rayner. Exhibit a clinical interview with Dr. Kenneth Boyd. There in black and white were my own words stripped of context, rearranged into symptoms. My grief reframed as delusion, my memories weaponized. When I called Marcus, he didn't pretend. "You're not well," he said. His voice clipped, his patience gone. "Just sign the documents, Elena. Let me protect you." I hung up without responding. Then I went to my closet, pulled out my military lockbox, and opened it for the first time in years. Inside was a number I'd kept in case everything ever truly fell apart. Colonel Anya Ruiz. I dialed, and for the first time in months, my hand stopped shaking. Colonel Ruiz didn't ask unnecessary questions. Her voice was sharp, clipped, but calm. "How long have they had access to your records?" "Since I was transferred out of Walter Reed," I said. "They filed paperwork while I was sedated." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Send me everything you have. Secure line. You're not alone anymore, Major." She was the only person who still called me that. Within 48 hours, my apartment transformed. Curtains drawn, whiteboards on every wall. My kitchen table became a field desk. 3 laptops ran side by side, humming low like generators in a tent at dusk. Ruiz assigned me a digital forensics officer call sign Murr, and we began digging. IP addresses, signature mismatches, logins that pinged from towers in Raleigh while I was stationed in Kandahar. A pattern emerged. Julian had used my credentials to authorize military logistics shipments, but not just once. And then came the manifest. It was dated 6 months before my discharge during an op in Syria. One of the shipments had been rerouted mid-air, signed under my name, diverted to a civilian contractor, listed under a shell company. I knew the contractor's name. He was one of Marcus's clients, a venture capitalist front, operating out of a Charlotte high-rise. The manifest listed trauma kits, medical-grade hemostatic gauze, exactly the kind we'd run out of the day Leo Morales bled out in my arms. I stared at the screen for a long time. When I finally moved, it was only to click save and send the file to Colonel Ruiz. Then I sat back, letting the cold wash over me. Leo didn't die because war is cruel. He died because my brother saw dollar signs in a supply chain and used my name to cash in. That night, I didn't cry. I sharpened. I printed everything, the logs, the financials, the fake clinic reports, even the email where Delilah had booked my coffee check-in with Dr. Boyd. It was all there signed and time-stamped. The final piece came from a retired sergeant named Hale. He'd been stationed at the same Syrian base years ago. Said something always felt off about the diverted shipments. He'd kept a duplicate manifest just in case. He emailed me a PDF attached with no message. The document had my name forged at the bottom and a handwritten note in the margin approving the diversion. But the handwriting wasn't mine. It was Marcus's. I'd seen that loop on his R's since grade school. This wasn't just fraud. This was blood. I sealed the evidence in a manila envelope, lined it with red tape, and stared at it on my table. It looked small, ordinary, but inside was 14 years of service. Inside was the last breath of a boy from El Paso. Inside was the end of a performance and the start of something raw and real. I wasn't going to beg a court to believe me. I was going to make them see. The second day in court began the way they wanted it to. Marcus wore the same navy suit. Delilah arrived in a soft gray dress with a pearl brooch and perfect posture. Their lawyer opened with rehearsed sympathy. "Your Honor," he said, placing a hand dramatically over the psychiatric report. "This is a tragedy. A decorated soldier lost to trauma. My client only wants to ensure his sister is safe, stable, and supported." The judge nodded slowly, eyes tired. I recognized that look. He thought he'd seen enough. He turned to me. "Ms. Rayner, this is your last opportunity to respond." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached down, unlatched my briefcase, and pulled out the envelope, red-taped crisp full of weight. I slid it across the polished table toward the bailiff. "I'd like to submit evidence," I said quietly. The judge opened the envelope with mild irritation. The first few pages, financial logs. Next, a shipping manifest. His fingers stopped mid-turn when he saw the SOCOM seal. His expression sharpened. He kept reading. By page 6, the courtroom was silent. And then the doors opened. 12 green berets entered uniforms, pressed boots, spotless eyes forward. They moved as one, flanking the back of the room with quiet precision. Colonel Anya Ruiz stepped forward, saluted the judge, then turned to Marcus. "Marcus Rayner," she said, her voice ringing like steel. "You are under federal investigation for procurement fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government." Marcus stood frozen. "This is absurd," he stammered, his voice cracking. "She's lying. She's—" Ruiz cut him off with a raised hand. 2 MPs stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Delilah let out a faint, choked sound as they locked the bracelets over his wrists. The judge didn't object. He just stared at the evidence, still flipping pages, with slow, disbelieving hands. I didn't move, didn't speak. I let the silence say what years of pleading never could. As Marcus was led away, his eyes locked with mine, and for the first time, he looked like the one lost. I didn't stay for the sentencing. I didn't watch Delilah cry in front of the cameras, or wait for the headlines to change. I drove east past Brecklin Ridge, past the towns that never saw me, past the church where my mother once told me to wear less black. I kept driving until the pines gave way to wind, and the scent of salt filled my lungs. It was quiet on the coast. Not empty, just honest. A week later, I stood on the land that once held my family's house. Nothing was left now, just a clearing where memory used to live. I didn't rebuild it. I built something else. A single-story timber structure with wraparound porches and tall windows that faced the mountains. Inside, no therapy posters, no intake forms, just firewood, quiet, and chairs meant for staying a while. I called it Sentinel Cabin. It wasn't a clinic. It was a place for veterans like me who had come home but never quite arrived. A place where silence wasn't something to fix. It was something to share. Late one night, I sat in the small soundproof room near the back and turned on the mic. "This is The Watch," I said, voice low. "If you've been told your pain makes you broken, that your grief is a liability, that your silence is madness, I'm here to say I see you, and you're not alone." The next morning, the inbox was full. Men and women I'd never met. Different ranks, different wars, all carrying the same weight. One of them showed up 2 weeks later, a young Marine. Didn't speak for days, just sat on the porch. Then one morning, as the fog lifted off the ridge, he said quietly, "I think I'm ready to come back." I didn't ask from where. I just nodded and poured the coffee. Some wars don't end when the uniform comes off. But out here at the edge of everything, we learn to carry each other through the quiet.